There it goes. Okay, good.
There it goes. Are you the only one on the call?
I think so. Oh, well, there it goes. There's Jeremy. I don't know how this, I think all the confusion back and forth.
Yeah.
The times that they crossed off on, and then they didn't send it Rich. Good morning, Jeremy.
Yeah,
Good morning. I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
You can't see it at the angle, but
I think I know. I'm on the camera's pointed down.
There we go. Have a great view of the table.
okay, there we go.
I recognize that room.
We were just chatting a little bit right now. Just I think there were some difficulty just getting in sync on the calendar invite, and we noticed that Ashley had been dropped off the original invite that went out. She only found out after on a subsequent email about the one about the invite to join that conversation with Bloomington on the homeless issue. So I don't know.
She's on this invite for this presentation, and she accepted it.
Oh, she did accept. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool.
Send her email this way.
Yeah, she didn't get it until later. And then let's see. Hopefully, we get.
I don't know how to tell when this was sent, but I mean, this was the invite that was sent for this presentation, and she's on it.
Okay. Do you know if Angela was also on that? I couldn't see the invitee list. I just pinged her this morning anyway.
It does not appear that she was, no.
Okay. Well, she should join us probably a little later. And this whole thing is going to be recorded, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We can share that with whomever's not able to attend. But it's just Jasmine and I.
Hey, Jasmine, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Rex's AI coming in. There we go. Well, these Zoom meetings now, everybody has a little AI bot that takes notes for everybody.
Cool.
So we had on all the ones that accepted were obviously yourself, Rex, Jasmine, you're on here, Kimberly, and Ashley.
Yeah. Rex will be logging in. He said that he would. So let me and then we had Andy Conway on there even too where he's optional. I see that.
Is Gary coming?
I just texted him right now. He's probably busy with the market at the moment. Maybe
That's what I figured because
Yeah.
the market.
Is Ashley going to be able to join?
I asked her this morning and I didn't hear back. So
Okay. Nate, I'll lean on you to just kind of give us the go ahead of when to get started. So it's because you got to know who you're expecting and all that on your end.
I would just see if Rex logs in. I'm pinging him again right now, but we were as recently as yesterday evening, he had confirmed.
I'm here.
right there.
Oh, is it?
Oh, there you are.
Oh, there you are, Rex. I didn't see you on my
Good
screen.
morning.
Hey, Rex.
I don't know why my video is not going. Let me see if I can fix that.
Perfect.
Oh, I know why. I have the camera off.
There we are.
Hey, Rex. How are you?
Excellent.
Okay, there you got somebody on there, right? Angela. Angela's on her way as well. So.
All right, we'll give her a few minutes. And we're going to go through a lot of content today because we're going to walk through each recommendation really in detail. So you have a good understanding of what we're recommending, why we're recommending it, how it applies to DOYA and all that. So it's going to be a lot of content, but then we're obviously going to send you the document after today to be able to review it again, go into more detail and all that. So buckle up, I guess is what I'm saying.
The volume up there, are we at the top?
We are at the top. Well, you know what? I'm here. Here. On the TV, that's probably where. Let's do that. That should do it.
Let's see. Jeremy, do you mind giving a couple test words? Just we're testing out our volume here.
Yeah, testing.
That made it a difference.
I can move my mic closer if I need to. Testing.
Think what when I. It's probably down here somewhere, right? No. No. Okay.
Let's
What would the computers?
what about the
The
okay,
computers.
Jeremy, do you mind talking?
Testing.
Okay.
There we go. We're now stadium volume.
Like there's so many people in the room that we need it, but did you want to start? Okay. I didn't know how it would work.
I want to sit right here, so when I'm stuffing my face on the dude.
I know, April turned the camera right to me, so I'm like.
Coffee. So that.
No.
Yeah, busy day for Gary. He's got the concerts today too.
What's today? Thursday.
Oh, that's right. No, the market, that's it.
Oh,
That's
farmer's
it.
market.
Yeah,
All right,
Friday mode.
Jeez.
It kind of feels like a Friday, huh? I know, I was thinking the same thing this morning.
Is that Angela saying or not?
She's on her way.
Okay.
Do you want to give her a minute or get started?
Yeah, if we can just wait, like,
Okay. Not a problem.
I know we're going till 11, right? That, well, we blocked out till 11 anyway.
Yeah, so we'll block out about an hour and a half or so.
Got it. Just a moment. Yeah.
Cost just about going into a meeting. You there? Hi, I can't stay on the phone with you, but just wanted to answer your call real quick.
Yeah.
Everything's done and we're good, right?
Hey, Rex, you're off mute just to give you a heads up.
Yeah, let me figure out. I got to mute.
Can't believe. Okay,
No worries. Well, we can start with that.
yeah, we can start with that. So Angela did not give me an exact ETA, and Kimberly said it dropped off hers. She forgot, and so she's going to be half an hour late. So why don't we just jump into it? There's a preamble here.
Okay. That'll work. And like we said, this will be recorded so I can go back and watch it. And you all can go back and watch it again if you want to, if you need to rewatch a certain section or something like that. So that's always helpful. So good morning, everybody. We're glad to be with you and reconnect to really walk you through the 5-year strategic action plan that we've developed for downtown Oxnard. We're going to walk you through every single recommendation in detail today, so you get a real thorough understanding of what we're recommending, why we are recommending it, and how it applies to Oxnard specifically. We're going to be walking you through the document itself. So some of these slides, or a lot of the slides, there's going to be a lot of text on there. Obviously, we're not wanting you to read through that on this presentation. We're going to explain everything as we go through it, but we want you to see the document as we walk through all this so you're familiar with it and have already seen it once. That way, when we send it to you in digital form, you'll be familiar with the layout, the different recommendations, and all of that, and it'll align with the presentation today. So just a little disclaimer there. There's a lot of text in here, but that's not for the presentation. This is the actual document. So as a reminder, our process is a little different than a typical planning process and some of the processes that you've gone through in the past and some of the other plans that you already have on the shelf there. We are not looking at a long-term time frame for downtown Oxnard. We're looking at a 5-year time frame. Okay, so when we talk about a 5-year time frame, the types of things that we're going to recommend today are more on the practical, tactical side of things than these long-range, big picture type recommendations. So some of these things are very practical, very simple, but it's things that we feel like can create some sparks in the short term and then help build momentum towards some of these bigger things that you have in the works or have in these other plans. Obviously, you know our team very well by now. As far as the timeline goes, I was there in person in February, so we conducted the little input sessions and walking tour. Jen presented the market analysis and the data back in April, and here we are in July delivering the draft plan. And then as soon as this plan is delivered and presented today, we're going to immediately shift to implementation. And so that's the next phase of the partnership that we'll talk about more on our next call, but just kind of plant some seeds there. We set all this up to help you take action on these recommendations. We don't want this to just be another plan, another list of ideas. We want to help you get started on these initiatives. So the next phase of the partnership will shift into a pretty structured format that we use to help you get some traction on a couple of projects immediately, so you can immediately start to point to some returns on investment from this plan. So we'll immediately shift into putting some structure around, okay, where do we want to start and how do we get started with a couple of projects immediately so we can start to show some action and results. As we walk through this, the recommendations, there's overlap obviously in some of the different recommendations, but they're organized into these 4 focus areas. They're basically chapters of the plan. Jen will walk us through policy and administration. I'll walk you through design and tourism and promotion, and then Jen will close us out with economic vitality. And so that's how we try to group and cluster like ideas together, but there is some overlap among some of the recommendations. So some overarching themes and things to start with just to set the stage and give some context. One thing that is a good thing about downtown Oxnard, but also a big challenge, is that you have already had a lot of big long-term, big plans developed over the years. And the good thing is I think you, as a community, try to follow those plans and they have used them as a guide. They're not just sitting on a shelf like we see in other clients, but it does get confusing when you have all these plans that you're trying to work from. And some of these are very big picture plans. So where do you start and how do you break that down into doable steps? On top of that, the recent cultural district designation, which is a huge honor and a really big deal for downtown Oxnard, kind of further complicates this because now you have another plan or another thing that you're working toward that adds just another layer of detail on top of this and another layer of complexity that's happening right now. And that one, I don't believe, came with just a checklist or a step-by-step plan. You're having to figure that out as you go. So we tried to really look through all the existing plans, take into consideration the recent cultural district designation, and figure out, okay, how can we look at all these plans and start connecting the dots so that all these things align as best as they can. And the one thing that really stood out to us as we reviewed all the different plans and looked for themes and overlapping elements there was that you have a very strong foundation of these bigger picture ideas and plans and projects. What's missing is the smaller scale, kind of granular, small scale projects that can create a spark and start to build momentum and activity and vibrancy in downtown. So it's the little things that are missing. And the perfect thing is that aligns with our approach. That is our whole approach, is trying to find those small scale, low cost, low risk projects that you can implement incrementally to start to build some momentum while you're working to build the foundation and gather the resources for those bigger picture projects. So this aligned perfectly with our approach and what we do anyway, and what the needs were for downtown Oxnard. So we took that in consideration. Then we also looked at the cultural district designation and figured out, okay, how can we not just add a whole nother thing on top of Doya's existing work plan and mission? How can we make these things align as much as we can so that it's not necessarily adding a lot of additional work, but just tweaking some things you're already doing so that you can align with the cultural district and start to capitalize on that. So that's going to be a theme as well. And then as a reminder, we really wanted to focus on recommendations and strategies that fit within Doya's work plan. What are things that you have control of with or without the city or other organizations that you can move forward with? So this really focuses on things that Doya can do independently. And so that was a big request early on in the process, to not look at things that the city can do and Doya can do and all these different organizations, really hone in specifically with Doya as the lead organization for this. So just setting the stage there. Another overarching theme that you're going to see throughout, and I'm jumping ahead to something we're going to cover in more detail later, but I wanted to set the stage because you're going to see this pop up throughout the different focus areas, is how do we package a lot of these efforts into a more cohesive and unified narrative so that as we're telling the story of what Doya is doing in downtown and what's happening in downtown Oxnard, how do we put together a narrative and a messaging campaign that can tell that story? And we talked about that on the walking tour and some subsequent conversations, that Doya has done for years and continues to do a lot and carries the load for downtown Oxnard. But I think you all admitted that you're not the best at telling that story and really bragging on yourself as an organization of the role and the impact that you really are having in downtown. These things are happening, people see the things happening, but we need to do a better job of screaming from the rooftops that Doya is responsible for a lot of these things. And to just tell a story about what's happening in downtown, because I think a lot of people still have perceptions and opinions of and impressions of downtown from 5-10 years ago, and a lot has changed. And we need to tell people, okay, here's the different situation in downtown. So we love the downtown Oxnard branding and the fonts and things like that. And I actually saw, I think it was on your t-shirt, I couldn't find anything online, but I saw it in person, where you had the DO pulled out on the t-shirt. And we love how that could be brought out into a broader campaign, because it represents obviously the DO in Doya, it's downtown Oxnard, but also is the word do, which is an action word. And it's a way that we can use that as an overarching kind of branding campaign to cover a lot of bases. We can use it to talk about what Doya is doing for you. What does Doya do? And we can tell that story about the things that the organization is doing for downtown. We can use it as action words for do dinner downtown, do music, kind of more tourism type language. We can use it from an economic vitality standpoint of do business. We want you to do business downtown. How do we activate the private sector and get action going there? So we saw that as a big opportunity to use your existing brand, but expand it a little bit in a very simple way, but I think a very impactful way. So you're going to see that in more detail a little bit later, but you're going to see it pop up in a few different recommendations. So I wanted to at least set the stage for that so you understand how that's going to link together throughout this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to start us off with policy and administration.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeremy, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Not quite afternoon, I guess. Okay, so like Jeremy mentioned, we're grouping like ideas together. So these are not necessarily chronological recommendations that will come. And one thing I want to point out to you as we get started is you'll see an identifier in the top left corner of the page that will correspond to an implementation matrix where we'll be taking these strategies and sort of breaking them down into, all right, here is our recommendation for when you should start each strategy or each project, what year, approximately an investment required, not a dollar amount, but a $1, $2, or $3 sign kind of mark. And then who owns the strategy. Obviously, we have written this for DOYA. So DOYA owns all of this, but sometimes there may be a committee or an action team that this is specifically written for, and that will be noted as well. So starting out with policy and administration. And so first, like Jeremy mentioned, what we feel like you guys need the most aligns with our process extremely well, which is the small scale incremental recommendations. And the way that we recommend those strategies and projects being implemented is through something that we call action teams. Now, we recognize, and I think it's very important that we start out with, first of all, you guys have done incredible work over the years. I mean, Jeremy and I, our entire careers have been in the downtown revitalization space, each of us almost 20 years. And the work that DOYA has done is incredible. The volunteer hours that you have amassed is unreal, but you have 2 staff members. So we don't want to just create more, right? So this action team recommendation is something that that Jeremy created, that we have dispatched with dozens and dozens of communities. It works if it is bought into. So we'll start there. But the recommendation is that you guys sort of adopt this project-based action team structure that operates alongside your existing committee framework. So we are not saying create more, but basically the idea here is that 3 to 5 doers from one of your committees, or it could be new people, but certainly it doesn't have to be, but taking a couple of doers from that committee and creating an action team specifically for one project in the plan. One project, so one at a time. So you'll see down here on the right, there might be a Plaza Park string light team. That action team is just focused on implementing that one project. And when that project is implemented, that team either goes away or they choose another project. So it's finite. It doesn't just last forever. And there may be individuals that hop in and hop out depending on their level of interest and the time that they have to offer. Like Jeremy said, after this plan is finalized, and this is, our presentation to you of the plan, certainly you'll have an opportunity to make edits or tweaks. Once those are made, we will move directly into implementation where Jeremy will train your team. And when I say your team, the core team, all of you, but certainly it may be important to have those committee chairs as part of the training as well. But we will facilitate what we call a project mapping workshop, where essentially we will train you on this process. It is easy. You will think it's too easy. And why are we even doing this? But what we've learned is that it's very common for volunteers and committee members to sometimes overcomplicate and to go back and, well, we've tried this before and it didn't work. Or thank you, Ashley, for joining us, and no shade at the city, but we hear a lot, oh, we can't do that because the city won't let us, or the city's going to do this. And that's not specific to Oxnard, that's universal. What this process does is it tunes that out and it really filters down, okay, what can we do to get this one project implemented with the resources that we have? And so we find that to be really effective. So that is the recommendation here for you guys to adopt that process. And then, going through a little bit further, and again, we're not going to read all of this to you today, but this kind of breaks down what that action team process is. And I think a couple of things that are important, I mentioned one, protecting staff capacity. You'll sort of be letting this action team run with the project. Certainly, staff can join the action team meetings as schedules allow, but you're really delegating, but in a very process-oriented way. Second, you'll see this 30-30 meeting cadence. That's again part of this. So once that project is identified and the project mapping is done, that action team meets every 30 days and they only really talk about what was done in the last 30 days as it relates to this project and what needs to be done in the next 30 days. So again, tuning out all of the distractions, staying very focused. Finally, I think, translating this plan into annual work plans, we know that you guys operate kind of on that annual plan process. You have an annual budget and all of that, and your committees are very much part of that. So the idea here is that each year you would select the projects from this plan that you really want to tackle, what committee it belongs in, and then those action teams again work alongside those committee members, but that way you can assign budget, to the projects each year annually. So again, this is just a process. A final point that I know Jeremy will talk about more that's really important is that you do have a large downtown and it can feel overwhelming. You're doing a great job of covering really everything, but you'll notice that the strategies in this plan are kind of front loaded for kind of that central area, the A Street and the blocks immediately surrounding Centennial Plaza and Plaza Park as kind of the core immediate focus, and then the Meta District being kind of the secondary focus. So again, one's not more important than the other, but if you can get visible wins in a confined area, it has a larger impact and really gets a lot of buy-in, spark, and excitement. So that's the process. So that's number one. Second, again, congratulations on the cultural district designation. It's huge. It's so exciting. Jeremy outlined the opportunities and the challenges that come along with that, right? Not a lot of budget and not a work plan, but some really cool ways to continue to share the awesome cultural vibe that you have in Oxnard and all of the art that you have, but then really dispatch the artisans in a unique way. And so this is sort of an umbrella recommendation of establishing arts incentives. Part one is, like Jeremy showed you, kind of an expansion of your brand, DO, Downtown Oxnard, but then also moving into the verb do art, which we think is cool. So it's really showing like action, creating and dispatching and activating art. The notion of this part one of the Do Art Activation program is that most grant programs are very prescriptive. We have a facade grant program and you have to do these things in order to get funded, right? You're already deciding kind of what the end result is, and that's great. That's a very structured way to protect funding. But one idea that we love that we've seen throughout the country is very much less prescriptive, and it is really putting the opportunity and the onus on the artisans, the merchants, or the nonprofit organizations to come to you with the idea of what the project is going to be. You guys do a lot in the downtowners, Oxnard downtowners, you guys do a lot of events. There's a lot happening. So how can you streamline sort of the goal here of the cultural district and some funding that get other people to come to you with ideas and then they do the work, but you help support them through the grant. So the purpose is to invite, as I mentioned, artisans, businesses, nonprofits to come to you with an idea. On this next page, you'll see we have some recommended kind of structure and parameters of this Do Art Activation initiative. This is a starting place. You will workshop whether or not these funding amounts are reasonable, whether or not these award tiers make sense for the budget that you have and budget that you are able to acquire. So don't read this as like, oh, well, we don't have that kind of money, we can't do this. This is just a starting place. But essentially, the idea is that there is priority criteria And then just overall eligibility. So the priority criteria, those that would earn extra points and potentially extra funding, is, if the projects that they're coming forward to you with are in the focus geography that I mentioned on the previous slide, kind of that core area. Priority would be given if they recur rather than happen just once. So if it's like a summer series, a music series, or, live plein air painting, something like that. So it's more bang for your buck. And it kind of builds a habit with your customers. Priority would be given if it activates a vacant storefront or an underutilized public space. In our fourth focus area, we're going to be coming back to activating vacant storefronts with pop-ups. And we know that Abel, you've got a lot of ideas about that. We try to take those and kind of expand on them. So more to come on that. But again, we're trying to make sure that any incentive that is offered is not just for a great idea or a great project, but that it's very strategic in nature, and it helps to really kind of pull together all the components of this plan. So you see some priority criteria, eligibility. I mentioned that nonprofit, business, or artisan. And then we're giving kind of awards via tiers. So micro grants of $500, to fund single activations. Like I mentioned, a plein air painting demonstration, a vacant window installation, a one night performance, something like that. But then also larger grants for programming, multi-month projects, or, larger in nature. We've got a case study here. San Francisco does this. They actually piloted this during COVID. They call it the Downtown Energy Program. On the other side of the country, there's also one in Memphis that we've seen quite a bit. And so again, it gets the community involved, lets them come up with the ideas, lets them implement it, but you really guide them with funding to be sure that it's very strategic in nature and hits on all of the points in this plan. The second part of this arts incentives recommendation is a document, essentially, that would accompany funding. And we're calling that just simply a permitting guide. With any, governmental process, it can be confusing for the average Joe to understand how to navigate certain processes within government. We see this everywhere. So this permitting guide doesn't change anything with the current permitting process, but it simply breaks it down into layman's terms and really gives them a checklist, these event promoters, of how to get their event permits using kind of institutional knowledge that you guys already have. So for example, we know that we've heard that if there is a series of events, you can just do one permit for that series. Again, if it checks certain boxes, that's something that an event promoter would love to know that maybe hasn't done this before. So again, it takes the process, breaks it down into a checklist to really streamline and kind of take away that fear factor that the outside public may have of going through this process. Post it on the website, make it readily available. But again, when someone receives funding, they are given that to help them through this process.
We can call that due permits.
Yeah, due permits. There you go, Rex. Love it. Love it.
You've bought in already. I love it.
That's right. Yeah, we're going to have a whole suite of doing after this. Okay, and the next recommendation here in policy and administration is something that Jeremy and I do a lot with college towns. For those college towns, it's less about arts and culture and more about town and gown relationships, which can be very difficult to wrangle in. So, but it's the same notion that we're recommending here. So an arts and culture roundtable, essentially, this is something that Doya would own. But what we're recommending here is that we're recommending to start at a quarterly cadence. We really love for these to be monthly, but we're trying to start small. And essentially, you would invite all of the wonderful partners that you have in Oxnard that are already focusing on arts and culture initiatives. So organizations like, certainly, Doya, who owns this, the city, the Downtowners, Visit Oxnard, the Performing Arts Center, the West Ventura County Business Alliance, on and on and on. Plus additional committees that the city has that are focused on, kind of citizen committees that the city has. And so you would invite those individuals to come to, again, starting out a quarterly meeting. And the purpose is for this one standing meeting to be the place that you guys are sharing ideas, also resources. There will likely be grant opportunities and in the future, for arts and culture, whether that's state, regional, federal, what have you. And having everyone at the table together, we have seen partnerships lead to increased grant funding rather than everyone applying for their own thing or everyone kind of doing their own thing. So the purpose is to create this platform for communication and coordination, to share resources. Also, throughout this arts and culture initiative, the expansion of it, there will probably be overlap. There will be events or programs that maybe occur on the same days. And this allows those discoveries to be made, right? So it's just a foundation of regular communication. So we've broken down kind of what the structure typically looks like with roundtables and communities that we work in. Again, recommending starting off with quarterly. If you think you can swing it, do it monthly, but start where you can. And then there would be a consistent agenda, and that agenda kind of, includes 4 components. Now, I will say the beauty of these meetings is that they're not business meetings. It's discussion and dialogue, but it's really easy to get together and burn an hour and a half just by catching up, especially with a bunch of different organizations. So kind of the buckets on the agenda would be cultural district work plan progress and upcoming requirements. If you don't have that work plan completely fleshed out, this is a great place for that to start to happen. Then the next 2 quarters on a shared calendar of what everyone is working on. Any type of event, program, or activation that is happening in the arts and culture space would go on this shared calendar. And I'm not saying a shared calendar like sophisticated for the public. I mean, although eventually that would be great, but just a piece of paper. Here's what we're planning to discover if there is overlap. Third bucket of conversation is open funding opportunities and which organization is pursuing each one. There may not be one of these every month or every quarter, but if there is, this is a great time to figure out who's the lead, get letters of support, everybody at the table, and then finally, really where the magic happens is a closing round robin in which each organization kind of goes through and says like one thing they need or one opportunity they have, something they're working on that they'd love collaboration on. This is a great way for messaging and marketing also to get coordinated. So again, that's kind of the structure. Then the beauty of this is that it can evolve beyond the arts over the next few years. Once y'all get the cultural district kind of structure running and figured out. So this may take, we're saying maybe after 2 years, it may take 3 or 4 years to really get that rolling. Having this structure in place, there are a lot of other things that these groups need to be talking about regularly beyond arts and culture, tourism, again, beautification, like all of these things. So again, it can move beyond that in the future.
Can you elaborate on the last one a little bit more? Organization names. Each organization names one thing. Can you elaborate on each organization?
Yeah, so that would be the organizations that are attending this. And I guess I should have mentioned that one representative from each organization attends these meetings because we don't want it to be a big meeting, but those organizations being
Can you
DOYA.
give an example of organizations that might be attending?
Yeah. So DOYA, the city, Oxnard Downtowners, Visit Oxnard, the Performing Arts Center, and then city-appointed citizen advisory committees like the Cultural Arts Committee. Those are just ideas. So you guys you may have more. The theater, maybe, the right person, an entity that needs to be at the table. So you guys will finalize that list, and that's where we have here kind of building the invitation list. The Parks Committee may be an important one to have there. So one representative from each organization that you guys deem appropriate to have at the table. And then that round robin is where we just go around the table and everybody says, here's what we're working on, here's what we need, here's an opportunity for collaboration.
Thank you.
I feel like some of this is probably already happening organically around the cultural district, but we're just trying to put a little more structure to it so you can maybe get some traction sooner.
Perfect. That's right. Okay. And then the final project or kind of collection of recommendations or collection of projects in this section is property owner engagement program. Again, you're doing a lot of this. So this is really pulling some of this together. So we kind of have three components that we're recommending as part of this property owner engagement program. And I'll go through each briefly. The first is a plain language, which is an important caveat, a plain language guide to the city's form-based code. We are big fans of form-based code and think it is an appropriate application to the downtown, and whatnot. But it is, if you are not in this world like we are, all of us on this call, it can be very confusing. And planner speak really starts to permeate through and talking about setbacks and this and that. And you're just an average property owner that is local mom and pop that doesn't really know what some of this means. It can be very intimidating. So the first recommendation is to use especially some of your brokers, and realtors and folks that are on on your land use committee or whoever is on that land use committee to really take the complexities of the form-based code and break it down into layman's terms into, if you can, a one-page guide. So this would talk about things like what is permitted by right on the ground floor, what requires discretionary view, what the parking and signage expectations are. Maybe there's some photos or pictures as supplements of good signage, good examples of that. What a change of use triggers and where an owner or prospective tenant should begin, right? So all we're saying is to take this and break it down into something that's easy to understand. So that's the first part. The second part is we're recommending 2 property owner focused workshops per year, maybe one in the spring and one in the fall. The whole goal here is to get these folks at the table. Now, Abel and his colleagues know a lot of the property owners. Like, we know there are certainly conversations happening. So we're not saying that that's the case, but having these established meetings, there will be people that will come and there will be people that don't come. And we have a component for them as well. But having kind of, again, standing meetings twice a year really allows that regular engagement for DOYA with property owners, but also, and maybe more importantly, property owners with one another. That can be so powerful. I just got back from one of these in Winter Garden, Florida, and the property owners took over the meeting in a way because they were so happy to talk with one another, share information and strategies and opportunities and things that they had learned and things that they had figured out. And it was awesome. So some ideas here for that workshop, a walkthrough of the form-based code cheat sheet. Hey, here's a resource we've created. Land use committee chair can go through it with city staff present in case there are questions. Hey, we're not changing the form-based code, but here's an explainer and kind of a Q&A section. Number 2, a case study of a recent successful activation with the property owner in the room to tell the story. That goes back to that kind of peer-to-peer mentorship, if you will. People love to talk about their work, right? And it's so nice to hear someone else that has figured this out and done it well. A briefing on DOYA's incentive tools, what you have in place, and what we're recommending both now and later in the plan, and then open question time. So again, it's just dedicated engagement. Whoops, sorry. And then the third component of this is a property owner intake conversation. Now, this is one that is a bit more laborious, and especially the first couple years is going to take some time. This is a great project for an action team, for those to just get out there and go through this, because this is really a place or a venue to hit those property owners that didn't come to the workshop and have no intention of coming to the workshop, because there are always those. So this intake conversation would be based around a form to capture the following information. Who is the owner? Who is the decision maker? And is there a preferred contact method? Again, when we're talking about properties, it can be complex. Somebody owns it, but then there's a property manager, but then there's, on and on and on. So really kind of solidifying who those people are, how they prefer to be contacted. Is it email? Is it just coming in my business, the business coming in the door? Is it letter? What is it? And then some specific information like who's the current tenant, lease expiration, lease terms, willingness to consider short-term or pop-up tenancy, and under what conditions. So you'll see as we go through some of this, it is laborious, but once you get this done, and this is not going to get done in the first 6 months. I mean, this may take a year or more to reach each property owner. And probably in the first year, we're only really talking about the property owners in that targeted core area. Then you can move on to others. But this is beyond just getting information and putting a spreadsheet together. This is really like your book of business for downtown real estate, because later in the plan, we're going to be talking about recommendations for pop-ups and other kind of activations in properties. And having this information at hand really allows you to move swiftly when you have a pop-up opportunity, rather than thinking, okay, who can I call? Who has a vacancy? It just really sets you up for success. Also, if there are known code or permitted use issues, it's nice to just jot those down, to have a record, have awareness of that. Plans for the property over the next 5 years, if they're willing to share. Because again, you may start having conversations with developers and investors, and they say, hey, what's downtown looking like? You don't have a ton of vacancies right now. So maybe these opportunities exist, but we're just not aware. And then finally, permission to activate the window with art or leasing signage, which we'll talk about later, while the space is marketed. So using the board's real estate expertise, like I mentioned earlier, is a great way to have these conversations. A lot of times property owners are a lot more willing to talk to a broker because they speak the same language. So really dispatching those folks is a great way to get this off the ground. And then treat the city as a property owner too, rather than a regulator in this conversation, and have a conversation with Ashley or someone on her team to say, okay, what are y'all's plans in the next 5 years? Is there anything that I need to know about? Just to get some of the same information. Again, really treating them as a property owner because they own a lot of property downtown. And then we have a link to a case study. This organization, the Regional Plan Association, is one that handles community development in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, but they're doing some of this and have a vacant storefront toolkit that we referenced here that you guys can take a look at. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy now to go through our next 2 focus areas.
All right, thanks, Jen. And to remember that this is a 5-year plan, so all this stuff is not year 1, right? I know you're probably already thinking, okay, here's all these things that you're throwing on top of what we're already doing. This is going to be spread out over 5 years, and we're going to think about how this can be delegated out to the different committees, different action teams, and all that. So we're going to continue to break this stuff down. And as Jim mentioned earlier, at the end of each section, when we send this document to you, there's going to be an action matrices. It's like a table that breaks every recommendation down into bullet points, and we try to outline a time frame of, okay, here's what we think you should do right now. Here's what we would think should be in that 1 to 3 year time frame. Here's what we think's in that 3 to 5 year time frame. So we'll give some thoughts on that, and that's what we want, some dialogue and feedback from you on that as well. So now as we shift into the design category, try to narrow it down because there's so many things you could do in this whole plan, every focus area. There's so many things that you could do. We had a struggle. It took us a while to really whittle it down to, okay, here's where we think you should focus. Some of the things I'm going to outline in here are things you've already talked about, and some of the things we're going to talk about in this whole plan are things that you've discussed in the past or are already on your to-do list. Part of what we're trying to do through this process is to give you some focus because there's so many things that you could do, there's so many things you want to do. We're trying to say, okay, here's where we think you should put your energy, resources, and focus over the next 5 years. So that's part of this, is just to really whittle it down to, okay, here's where you should focus. So as we get into the design section, a big part of what we want to deal with is those vacant properties. And there's some throughout downtown, especially on the boulevard there as you're coming into downtown. I mean, the entrance as you come in to downtown, that first impression is a big deal because I mean, we talk about first impressions a lot in our world and how that impacts everything from tourism to investment to everything, new businesses locating there. And right now, the boulevard is not a very good impression of downtown in that corridor. So it's a little bit overwhelming because it is such a big area. I know we have some challenges there with property owners and other things, but we are starting to see some sparks here and there, which is good. So how can we, in the short term, start to address some of these visual challenges in downtown? So again, these are really short-term fixes while we work on the bigger issues that might take a little bit more time. We'd love to see a lot of those properties renovated and reactivated. That's going to take some time, right? What can we do in the meantime? So we really want to put a focus on an organized, intentional effort to activate those vacant storefronts and vacant buildings over the short term and just visually activate them. Not talking about activating them with a business or any kind of activity yet. Jen will talk about that in another section. Right now, we're just talking about a Band-Aid. How can we distract from the condition of some of these properties and just the vacancies, especially in the areas that you have mass vacancies? So what are some things that we can do to distract from that in the short term? And the good thing is we have a ton of examples from other cities of how they've dealt with that. And it's a pretty, on the surface, a simple solution, but it does take some coordination with property owners and communication and things like that. It also overlapped really well with cultural district best practices. We did a lot of research on other cultural districts and what do they do as far as different projects and initiatives, especially some of the successful ones. And we tried to figure out what were some of the recurring themes in cultural districts that multiple communities were doing. So we tried to incorporate that into the plan itself, and it really showed up in this recommendation specifically. So what are some things that we can do? I think the treatments are one thing. And I'm going to talk about some examples of different treatments that we can do on those storefronts. Just like I was talking about with the Do campaign, anytime you can package things into kind of a bigger narrative or different messaging, it makes it more impactful and it helps get people excited and willing to participate. So any way we can package this into this program or initiative that we're pushing in downtown, I'm recommending starting on the boulevard first and then expand into other areas. Again, we can't focus on the entire downtown at one time. We have to break it down into more bite-sized pieces. So I think that first bite for this particular recommendation is the boulevard, and then we have some recommendations for what that next phase could be. But putting together that program and really specifying, okay, here's what we're trying to accomplish. If we can come up with a catchy name. In other communities, we talked about a windows of opportunity. I think there might be some ways we can link it to that Do brand, but some way to create a brand or kind of campaign around this effort. Then look at specific treatments that we can do on those storefronts. First, starting with properties that are in really bad condition that might be boarded up or might be just a shell of a building. This top row are examples of that. These upper floor windows are just boarded up with plywood, but they've painted a mural on them, just a simple mural. It's a way to incorporate art into this effort, which will meet some of the criteria for the cultural district. These are just vinyl banners that are hung over a vacant, kind of really rundown storefront that the property's in really bad condition. It's almost a shell of a building. This is where there's no plywood yet. There's broken windows and things like that. So in the short term, they had a local artist produce this art and they printed it on vinyl banners. It's not the best application there, but it's something that we can do. It's fairly low cost and just a quick Band-Aid. This is another example of this is just a shell of a building. There's literally no storefront, no windows. There's grass and dirt behind here. It's just the outside four walls, not even a roof on the building. But what they did was they had these custom branded little vinyl mesh banners printed that had the tourism type branding and messaging on it. They outlined some famous people that were from that community. It was a way to link to the cultural and heritage of the community and a way just to distract from the condition of the building. There's other programs that had little art displays. This is just local school, high school art programs that were just displayed on easels. They put little lattice work in the background just to block views into the vacant space. This is a program I'll talk about in a minute. They have artists submit artwork and then they print them on banners that are hung in the windows. Window cleans are a huge opportunity. These two right here are from Indianapolis. I'll talk about that program in a minute. There's a specific district there that had a lot of vacancies, a lot of rundown properties. But when I drove through there, I'm distracted looking at the artwork. And I'm not really paying attention to the condition of the buildings. And they have a really structured program that rotates the artwork seasonally. And they try to link it to things that are happening in the city. Like the most recent one, I think they were hosting the WNBA All-Star Game or NCAA tournament, something with basketball. So all the artwork, the theme was basketball. And some of it was very artistic interpretations of that. It wasn't just literal sports themes, but it was a way to incorporate art into what's going on in the city. They even had maps and things like that linked to it. So a lot of things we can do there. Obviously photographs of famous artists or musicians or famous people from the community. Historic photographs can be blown up. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we can do with either window cleans or printed on banners that we can just hang in the windows. So those are treatments for boarded up storefronts or just empty storefronts in the short term. And the other things we can do is just coordinate efforts. And you're going to hear a lot about that in the tourism section. Not necessarily adding more work on your plate, but how can we just coordinate efforts and maybe be the connector? And this might be a good opportunity for downtown Oxnarders as well to organize like either a storefront decorating contest or even a seasonal storefront painting to where you're working with the artist that's going to do the window paintings and you're going to recruit businesses that want to participate. Then you can negotiate a group rate. We've seen that in other communities where they might get a dozen businesses that are willing to do the storefront painting installation, and they get a group rate for that because the artist is going to get to do a dozen windows, not just one. So it's just coordination. It's not necessarily you doing the project, but just the coordination there. And things like that just create that more unified appearance throughout downtown. So we have a lot of case study examples here. One in Akron, who's a client. They have a curated storefront as their program name, or it's a very sophisticated program. So that might be down the road, but they are literally turning some of these downtown storefronts into galleries to display artwork that rotates out annually, I believe, with a description of the artists and things. The People's Storefront in Ontario, Canada seemed like a really good program as well. They print artwork on banners and hang them in the windows. We have Window Pops in Birmingham. This is something that Laura told me about because she lives in downtown Birmingham. Really coordinated effort there. These two examples, and they've incorporated their branding into a lot of that. So I mean, this isn't anything extravagant. It's like streamers hung in the window, so it doesn't have to be a real costly installation, but it's something that is better than just a vacant, empty, rundown storefront. And then sidewalk galleries in Indianapolis. That's part of another program that they run there that links to the window cleans that I mentioned earlier. It's a very organized program. So we have a lot of case study examples there on a similar program. And then just examples of seasonal storefront paintings. I mean, this is a very temporary installation, obviously, but if you can get multiple storefronts to participate, then as you come downtown, or even if you just focus on a specific block, that's something that really creates this unified appearance in downtown throughout the seasons. And it's just fun. Another best practice that came about when researching cultural districts was wayfinding and signage. And I know that's something that you've talked about there and worked on in the past. But as you know, wayfinding signage is super expensive, right? And especially directional signs and things like that. So I think that's still something to work toward. It's something that's needed. But what's a short-term kind of first bite of a project like that might be lower cost? And one thing that I think is fun, I see it in different communities, are these sidewalk stickers. And that's something that you might remember back from the COVID days. They were everywhere to mark the 6-foot spacing in stores and things like that. But the tourism world has really adopted them as a tourism tool. Now we see those around as little markers. It's almost a little fun, low-cost wayfinding signage system that can use your branding and your color palette and really be this comprehensive system. But they're pretty affordable. They're short-term, right? They don't have a super long lifespan, but it's something that you can try out. You can test different locations and different ideas, see what works, see what people like. Then you can invest in the more permanent versions down the road. This lets you test things before you invest in the permanent fixture. I think this would be a way that you could link in the cultural district. I believe you had to do almost not a map, but a inventory of arts and cultural assets and things like that. So this might be a way to really call those out. This was an example in Jackson, Tennessee, to where they had really calling out famous artists and musicians from their community. This is a Rockabilly Walk in their case, but it might be a way to highlight those different arts and cultural assets, destinations, or just people that are from Oxnard that you want to call out there. And it'd be a way to link in other efforts that you've done. I mean, this was one Old Town Pasadena, to where it was just a simple welcome message, branding and things there. So it could just be a general sticker there that might have a QR code that links to Doya's site with events and more information there. I think it could link into things like the taco trail and things that you've already done. So again, we're trying to connect dots with things you're already doing in downtown, not necessarily creating something new, but how can we bring these things together in a more visual way to connect the dots for visitors and customers. And you see how these stickers are used in a lot of different ways. They can use creative messaging, and the QR code is a great tool to be able to link to more information. So you're not having to squeeze everything on one sticker. You have that QR code to go to other things. And this is an example of one in North Carolina to where they literally used it as a directional sign, more pedestrian oriented, obviously. So you can do a lot with these, but they're a way to try out and maybe have that first bite of a big comprehensive wayfinding system in the short term. And as far as more typical streetscape and design activations there, I mean, obviously when you get into more of the design component, those things get expensive when you're talking about infrastructure upgrades and streetscape upgrades and things like that. So we really wanted to focus on some key activations that we think would give you a higher return on investment. And then what are some ways that we can start small and incrementally upgrade those over time? So I know everybody always wants to jump to the final version. If we're going to do a pocket park or activate an alley, everybody sees the final version that they want with the nice benches and landscaping and potted plants and things. That has a bigger price tag as well that you might not be ready for. So how can we maybe test some things out with some temporary treatments and then upgrade that over time depending on how people use it and what the reception is? So I want you to start with short-term things and then work up from there. These are things that you've already talked about and already had on your to-do list. But as we looked at all the things that you could do, these were the 3 activations that rose to the surface for us that we feel like will give you the biggest bang for your buck. So I'm going to talk about specific activations for Plaza Park, for the alley and Paseo activations, and then this A Street property next to the kind of on the backside of the theater that's a city-owned property here. So first, it was my understanding that you already had a plan and really gotten estimates on adding string lights around the perimeter of Plaza Park. And that's something that we think is a worthwhile project. String lights are something that add instant vibrancy. It gets people's attention. They become photo op destinations and all that. We recommend string lights all the time because, relatively speaking, it's a fairly low cost project compared to other infrastructure projects, but it gives you such a big bang for your buck in return on investment. So this is something that I know you got to find funding and all that, but it's something we think needs to be remain on the priority list to add that. So that's a simple one or a short one, but something we feel like is worthwhile to continue to pursue doing that project. Similarly, I know you had plans for some paseo activations downtown. And I think that funding was reallocated for us. So we appreciate that. And that went to this plan, the development of this plan. But we do think activating those alleys is a huge, or should be a priority because they're smaller spaces. You can have a bigger impact with less things than when you're talking about a major streetscape project or something. It's a smaller scale space. You can have a big impact. It'll be very visual, which I think is important to have some visual wins that you can point to and get people excited about what's going on in downtown. And it's ways that we can incorporate some tactical urbanism installations and some really low cost, short-term temporary treatments to test things. We can test different layouts and different amenities, see how the public responds, see how the business community responds, and then we can adjust and make investments in the permanent fixtures down the line. And also, these types of activations were very common in cultural districts because they're great spaces to be able to add artwork and things like that. So definitely think that should remain a priority. We identified 2 specific ones along A Street, starting with the one that's south of Fifth Street next to the tattoo business. And then the next one is, actually I forgot I had pictures of them. So the first was this one, and then the second phase would be this one. So those are the top 2 priorities. I know these are things you've talked about already. So the types of things we're talking about are string lights. Similar to up here, you'll see that in other examples. These can be done where they're actually fixed to the buildings, or we can do some short-term versions, which I'll show you in a minute just to test this idea. We can do street paintings, we can do furniture and things like that. We actually outlined specific treatments and even a phased approach to that in here. As you read through this, it'll walk you through what we think you should start with, starting with string lights, then working into seating, then into planters and things like that. So as we can phase that in over time as resources allow to start to activate those spaces. Also, I know we already had some plans for incorporating art. That's a big part of the cultural districts is how can we incorporate art into all these things, and these are a great space for that. They can be removable panels like you see in these where they aren't actually painted murals. They're actually artwork that can be removed and relocated or switched out over time, small sculptures and things like that. These are great spaces for those types of installations. I think it's also important that we have to program activity in these spaces. It can't just be, oh, we're putting some nice benches in there and we expect people to use them. We have to give people a reason to use these spaces. So this last part talks about creative arts programming, which we'll talk about more in the tourism section. But what are some things that we can do to plan some activities in these spaces? We don't want to add more events and things like that on your plate. What are some simple things we can do? Included a case study or 2 different case studies. One is sidewalk sessions in Mobile, Alabama. It's basically a coordinated buskers program where they set up buskers and musicians around downtown or allow local musicians to play. The other one is Ink in the Alley, and I thought this was a good partnership with the tattoo shop next door. I'm gonna skip to that real quick. Ink in the Alley, this is from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. They have an alley that they do things in all the time. But they partner with local tattoo shops and tattoo artists and really highlighting that as an art, which obviously it is, but I think it gets overlooked by more traditional types of artwork like painting and photography and maybe pottery and things like that. Tattooing is a art, and they're really talented artists. So they planned a whole simple event around that and had live tattoo demonstrations. They had temporary tattoos for kids and people that weren't ready for that final decision there. But it was just a fun way to celebrate that type of art in the alley. So that was an example. And then Eagle Alley is a former client of Romulus, Michigan. They're outside of Detroit. They had a great, perfect example of how you can incrementally upgrade a space depending on how people respond to it. They had this vacant lot that they had taken ownership of in downtown, just a grass lot. They started with very temporary treatments. You can see buckets with concrete and a 4x4 holding up string lights. I mean, as low cost as you can get, some simple picnic tables. And they started programming activities in that space, like kind of like what I was talking about with live music or things like that. And people loved it. People loved the space. The adjacent building or businesses started using it. There's like a Taekwondo martial arts studio next door. He'd have little kids karate classes out in the space. It was awesome. And so that showed the city and the downtown organization that it was worth investing in. So they slowly started upgrading the space. And within a few years, they had created a more permanent version of that with concrete, turf, shade sails, different types of seating, and all those types of things. But it was done incrementally. They didn't jump to the final version. They started very low cost and upgraded over time. So I want to really emphasize that. The third key activation is that city-owned space on A Street next to the theater. I think you know which one I'm talking about here, the small space here. We just see the momentum and activity that's already happening on A Street. And I think that was something that we all came to the conclusion on the walking tour, was that's the area that has the most energy right now. So how can we just start to grow from there? How do we build off of that and expand it to the next few blocks? And so that's why we chose that site, because it is close to existing activity. And so really working to slowly and incrementally convert that space, similar to what I just mentioned in Eagle Alley, starting small, starting low cost, and then evolving over time, and really looking at third spaces, social yards, beer gardens. Those are the types of terms we're going to look at for inspiration, because this is the vibe we're going for. It doesn't have to be this final perfect version. I think people like the little bit of gritty, authentic atmosphere. So string lights, different types of seating, bright colors, shade either through bistro umbrellas or shade sails. Very simple things, but things that people respond to, and it's things that we see that are very popular around the country right now. Outdoor games like cornhole, Jenga, those types of things really start to activate the space. We feel like that property in particular should be a short-term priority to activate. So now I'm going to go into tourism and promotion. And in this section, we're not looking for more big festivals and events. It's about how do we create constant activity downtown? How are we constantly inviting people to downtown? And what's the narrative about downtown? I think that's really important. I touched on that earlier on. What's the story that we're telling about downtown Oxnard? And how are we shifting perceptions about downtown from people that might have snapshots of things that were the case maybe 5-10 years ago, but are no longer the case? And again, how can we kind of link in the arts wherever we can in simple ways, and to start to loop that into existing events or existing things that you're already doing? So when we're talking about arts-based micro events is the term that we use because we're not looking at big festivals, but what are some activities that we can plan that mainly require coordination? We're coordinating with the merchants to make sure that they're going to be open with consistent hours and that they're participating in whatever the theme is, and setting a theme for the activity. And then promotion, that we just have to promote the event mainly on social media, and that's all it requires. So it's not extensive staff time and volunteer time. It's really coordination and promotion, but it gives people fun reasons to come downtown. So that could be anything from a pajama party, come shop in your pajamas. It could be a scavenger hunt. It could be something as simple as like Candyland. That's just a way to check off different merchants to visit downtown, a bingo card. We have 1,000 different examples of these types of events, but just trying to look at your events calendar, figure out when the big events are happening and where are the gaps? Where are the gaps where there's nothing happening? Because your merchants need a more constant flow of foot traffic and a more constant and predictable customer base. And so if we're going to recruit new businesses, if we want our existing businesses to succeed, we need more than just this influx of people one Saturday a quarter, or for those big events. We need a more consistent customer base and foot traffic throughout the year. So these types of events, micro events, are the way to do that. So how can we plug in with art walks, art crawls, sip and shops, those types of things that are just coordination, promotion, not extensive planning. And we have a lot of different examples from open mic nights, trivia nights, those types of things, karaoke nights, things that restaurants and retailers can get involved in. 80s night, it can just be a theme that gives people a reason to come downtown. It can build off existing events that you have as a little add-on, or it can plug in the gaps in between events. So we have a lot of different examples of these that we can talk through. Just wanted to talk about the importance of really filling in the gaps so you have a constant calendar of these types of events throughout the year that can bring people downtown on a regular basis. Another thing along with that is with DOYA and maybe even other like Downtown Oxnarders and other groups to really do an audit, for lack of a better, I hate that term, but an audit of your existing events. We're working with another client on that right now as one of their action teams that Jen mentioned earlier. We formed an action team around this specifically because they had a lot of events and festivals throughout the year, and it was stretching them too thin. Their staff was stretched way too thin, and their boards and volunteers were just dominated by those events, and they weren't able to focus on some of these other things that they need to do. So we're working with them to really look at their existing slate of events and assess them. We've created a kind of a process for them to make an assessment of each event based on impact, whether that's economic impact, foot traffic, whatever, return on investment. Here's the amount of time and resources and energy that it takes to put on the event. Are we getting the impact that we really want out of that? And being honest with ourselves is this event really meeting the goal that we want? We're doing it because we've done it for 30 years, but is it really having the impact that we want it to have? Or is there a better way to go about it? Or is there a better way to make that impact? And then really looking at the strain on staff. That's a big component of it, of if your staff is dominated by doing 2 events, and that dominates most of their time, maybe there's a way that we could rework this and rethink this to where they can focus on other things, but still have the impacts that we want downtown. So really recommend that you put some focus on that, of looking at your existing event calendar and have an honest assessment of those. And being willing to shift if you need to and get rid of some events and maybe shift or rework some events, which is hard to do, but important. And then finally, how are we connecting the dots between the people that are coming downtown for these events or micro events or activities? And how are we connecting the dots with those people and the merchants? Because that's really the goal. I mean, we're bringing these people downtown, but we want them to spend money, right? And leave some tax dollars behind. But we have to be intentional with connecting them with the merchants. A lot of that's on the merchants and the businesses themselves to do that. I mean, if they have hundreds or thousands of people outside their door, they have to figure out how to get them in. But I think your role is to have some coordination and help them along in that. And part of that is making it very obvious to the visitors of what businesses are open and participating. So developing some sort of signal for that, whether it's, this was a community in Kentucky that did these little wrought iron stands. They developed a branded little banner, and the open signs are out all the time, but they also switch them out for specific events. So it really highlights which merchants are participating. This one created this little simple A-frame sign with their branding on it that were distributed to participating merchants. We have a community right now that they have a green balloon as their signal because there's this big reoccurring event. It's called the Green Market. So all the businesses that are participating have green balloons outside their storefront. It can be something simple, but something that's coordinated across the downtown merchants so that when the visitors see that signal, whatever it is, whether it's a sign, a balloon, whatever it might be, that signals to them, okay, that business is open, I'm gonna go check that out. And so it just creates that more unified, cohesive experience for visitors when they're in your community. This was something that we've talked about before as well. The social media content for Downtown Oxnard is great. It's very high quality. The photography, video, all that, very high quality. Our critique of it is that it's very event focused. You have a lot of activity around an event and you're promoting an event. You have great photo albums and all those types of things. But other than events, there's not a real diverse mix of content for downtown, which I know when it's a volunteer committee, social media is hard to do with a full-time person dedicated to it, much less a volunteer committee. So we totally recognize that. But we're trying to point out some other types of content that could be rolled into that profile to fill in the gaps between events and have different types of content. So we have a lot of different ideas here. And these are things that just takes a little bit of organization with the committee of thinking through a content calendar and planning out, okay, here's our main events. So we know we have those covered. Where are the gaps? And here's some different types of content that we can plug into those gaps. And it's stuff that the committee and board can get involved with, collecting that information, collecting photographs, interviewing downtown merchants for some storytelling content and things. And then it brings it together to be able to post that throughout the year. So we have a lot of different examples there, but pointing out the need to really diversify the content on social media to really tell the story of what's going on in downtown Oxnard. There's a very small community in rural Mississippi, so you wouldn't think it'd have a direct correlation to Oxnard, but I think they are just a really good example of one, they have a very cohesive brand. The color palette, the fonts, it's all very consistent. So no matter what they're posting about, whether it's an annual meeting or a sip and shop or an art event, it's the same look and feel to it. So every time on my feed, when I see those colors, I automatically know it's Water Valley. And so I think that's something important as well with your branding and color palette to weave that in to all content. And then roll in different types of content. And this is something that they do a really good job about. And they don't do this every week, so it's not that prescriptive, but they even broke it down to Townie Tuesday. So a little shout out to a local merchant or local hero or somebody that's involved in downtown as a little storytelling component. They have a Where's That Wednesday, just a little visual scavenger hunt of where's this little snapshot. Time Travel Thursday, historic photographs, Fun Fact Friday. Again, they don't do that every week, but those are easy things that you could build ahead of time, have a library of those types of things so that when you have a gap in content, you just throw one of those out there and that gives you a post for that week, right? And this is stuff that committee can really help build this type of content, right? So it's not just overly complicated things, but it helps generate more consistent traffic and give you more diversity in the types of content that you have. So one big focus that I think we need that's a big priority in this section is really celebrating Doya and really being more proactive in showcasing the role and impact that Doya has and has had over the past few decades in downtown Oxnard. And really showcasing what this organization does, what the bid does, what's the role of that. I know you had a very successful vote to reestablish the bid or renew the bid a few years ago. So obviously people are aware of what you're doing and what that's for, but you can never, it's still important to tell that story, right? So this is just a recommendation to really focus on being proactive in telling the Doya story and connecting the dots on what you do as an organization, the projects that you're involved in, and things like that. Social media will play a big role in that to be able to tell that story and highlight different things. But we can also do visual promotional material as well, like sandwich board signs, window clings, and things like that that can link and connect the dots between the different things that you're doing there. And that will link very much to the next recommendation where we walk through that do campaign. But it's important to package all this. Another client that we're working with, they had a similar problem to where they really need to showcase success and wins. So we developed a brick by brick campaign that linked, they had brick streets and it really linked to that community. But the idea was that every project, whether they were repairing 5 feet of sidewalk or they had a new business locating downtown, anything in between, any project small or large was another brick, right? In this brick by brick idea of revitalizing downtown Slayton. So in their case, they were trying to promote every project as a brick and that every win was a brick. When Doya, I think we can really work with that do wordplay to highlight different projects, different wins, different things that you're doing as an organization. We worked with a group in North Tahoe last year, I guess it was, and they do a great job of that. They are very upfront that they're funded by 2 different things, Tourism Business Improvement District and Transit Occupancy Tax. That was their funding, TBID and TOT. And they had this logo that talks about TBID and TOT, sorry, that's a tongue twister, TOT and TBID dollars at work, North Lake Tahoe, and you see this logo everywhere. And they are very proactive in talking about what these dollars are used for, what the organizations do with that money and the impacts they're having in that region. From social media graphics, social media posts, they're talking about what the TBID funded that year, different events that they funded. They have sandwich board signs that say, "You're taught in TBID dollars at work." Anything, I mean, it's listed everywhere, even on their little Zamboni, on their temporary ice skating rink, has that logo on it. So thinking about something with Doya as well, to just constantly talk about what those dollars are used for, what the organization does, and all that, so people are constantly seeing that over and over. All right, so finally in this section, this is what we teased earlier, was really how can we have this overarching package and brand that pulls all these things together? And really pointing to the D and the O is Downtown Oxnard and that action word of do. I think there's just so many things that we can do with that. And we just gave a little teaser in some of these graphics. There are some that Jen already showed, but do art, do dinner, do music. What does Doya do for you? There, a to-do list with the capital D-O. There's so many things that we can do with this, and roll in things that you're already doing, but do it in a better way that tells that story and builds that narrative with that umbrella tagline. And we just break down a lot of different examples, things to do, all that. The downtown doers or do crew, I kind of glossed over it in the last recommendation, but one thing that's very important for Doya, and this is something that was very obvious to me in my input meeting with you all when I was there in person, was it is very important that the Doya board and all these other, I mean, we have the Oxnarders and all these different organizations, you have to be the cheerleaders for downtown. If you are not talking positively about downtown, nobody's going to. You're on the front lines of this stuff. I know it's frustrating. I do this type of work in my own community, so I know how frustrating it can get, but that has to remain, the negative frustrations have to remain internal. External, on social media, with other people in the community, you all as a board and organizations have to be the cheerleaders. And that's the do crew, the downtown doers. You have to be positive about downtown. We're not ignoring the realities of some of the things you're facing, but you have to be the positive messengers for downtown. And so I pointed that out in the last recommendation. I just forgot to talk about it, but that links into this as well, of just how important the messaging and the narrative is in this work. I think that ties into a lot of this as well. So I'll turn it over to Jen to close us out with our last section, and then we'll wrap it up after this.
Hey, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you guys for sticking with us. This is exciting for us to go through it with you, so we appreciate your time. And I also want to clarify one thing I said earlier, because it'll really come through in this recommendation. I said you don't have a lot of vacancies. What I meant was retail ready vacancies, right? And we were talking about on that slide leasing. Obviously, you have mass vacancy as it relates to buildings that are deteriorating, underutilized, vacant lots, and things like that. But when we're talking about, retail ready real estate, based on the figures that you've shared, it's pretty limited. So we have some recommendations in this final section that kind of touch on both, and recommendations for both, for those retail ready spaces, for those maybe in the middle, and then certainly for those that are large albatross buildings or even districts that need some help getting a spark. So starting out, this first recommendation is coordinated property promotion. And there are kind of three specific, recommendations or projects within this strategy. First, maintaining a district property inventory, which aligns with kind of that property owner intake process I was talking about in the policy section. Number two, branded window clings and signage for available space. And then number three, rebuilding the listing page on Doya's website, or at least updating it, modernizing it a bit with a promotion package offered to those brokers or property owners that are interested in participating at no cost. So I'll go through each of these. But this is really focused more on those retail ready pieces of real estate for lease, or those that are actively for sale. So I'll try to clarify kind of each tier as I go through. So the first section kind of component of this won't take long because it really, again, aligns with that property owner intake process and form that I mentioned earlier. And it is your property inventory, which your land use committee is already working on. We know that. We just have some kind of recommendations of components to include in that. This can be the same document as what is generated by that property intake process. In fact, that's probably the best way to handle this as you're going along and talking to individual property owners, having one big spreadsheet, but different fields kind of for each depending. So a lot of the same fields are what we already talked about, ownership, square footage, current use and occupancy status, the owner, decision maker, and listing broker if it is listed. But then also some specific kind of property assets like utilities, restroom or ADA status, and restaurant infrastructure, including grease trap, hood, and ventilation. These are things that automatically, especially the restaurant equipment, that automatically set a property up for a restaurant use. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. It's expensive, I guess, to add that type of equipment to historic buildings in particular, especially if they are like an inline building. Sometimes it can be really difficult to get that ventilation out. And so knowing which properties are best set up for restaurant backfilling is great. Having photographs of the interior and the storefront, if the property owner will allow it. Obviously, you can take them at the storefront, but the interior. And then kind of the date that it was last verified. So again, this is just fine tuning that inventory that your team, that your committee is already working on, so that when you have an interested tenant, restaurateur, entrepreneur that starts as a vendor, maybe part of a pop-up, and then is ready to move on, that we know exactly how to facilitate that. Now, I am a former Main Street director. I started my career almost 20 years ago as a Main Street manager. One thing that I think it's important to clarify is that we are not saying that you guys need to be the brokers, the listing agent, or any of that. But what I am fervently saying is that, and you're doing so much of this, and in fact, one of the recommendations is about taking work that Abel has done and memorializing it because it's really, really good. It is the programs that win are the ones that do get in the real estate space and act as a liaison. And that is the recommendation here, is to really act as the grassroots liaison in the promotion and transaction process. So first component is easy, focusing on that inventory. The second one is one that we have seen to be so impactful, and that is branded window clings and available property signage. Have a former client in Illinois that the first time I visited that client, it was a beautiful historic downtown, but as I walked through for sale, for lease, for sale, for lease, and it was the immediate takeaway was, my God, this place is empty, it's dead. And so yes, if a property is listed with a broker, they're going to put whatever they want in the window, but suggesting that branded signage is a better alternative that says, we can use the do, right? That brand extension to make something exciting, but showing there's opportunity here. Come be part of what we're building, of what we're doing in downtown Oxnard, is just a much better message, and it invites investment rather than signaling blight. So the recommendation is that, Doya would design this window cling, and maybe there's an opportunity to put a unique QR code, or to have that window cling and then also have the broker signage, because they're a lot of times going to want their branding there as well. But having these readily available in a couple of different sizes that fit most storefronts is a really great way to, again, invite investment, but share that this is a revitalization project and not dead, not blight. So I think that's important. Then, kind of tying all of this together is your listing page and a promotional package. We know that you are listing opportunities on the Joya website. You already have that properties element. What we're recommending is to maybe, update that if it hasn't been updated. And then also accompany that with this promotion package. So if a property owner is interested in opting into this and taking advantage of the resource, they would get this toolkit. Basically, A would be placement on the Joya listing page. B would be a branded window cling, printed and installed. You take care of that. Joya takes it to them if they say yes, puts it in the window or hands it to them and allows them to, and to put it in their window. A dedicated social media post at the time of the listing. Not just like sharing the real estate website, but really using your branding, and this do whatever we say downtown. Inclusion in a quarterly available properties post across all Joya channels, and then a copy of the district data sheet for the broker's own marketing materials. And what we're talking about with this district data sheet is basically contextualizing, sort of synthesizing a lot of the data that we shared with you through the market analysis, and we can help you with this. But basically saying, here's a snapshot, here's the opportunity, both visually with these properties, with this branded signage, but then here's what the data is telling us. As as you guys remember, there is significant retail leakage that we are seeing in a 10-minute drive time around downtown Oxnard. So by really showing that, it really helps explain the opportunity in a super positive way. So having a ready-to-go toolkit where that if the property owner opts in, they get all of those things. And we think this really just helps with messaging, but also enticing them to work with you and not just kind of do their own thing with property promotion. Okay, the second kind of category that we have is pop-up and pre-vitalization activations. And we have, again, three kind of components of this recommendation, and I'll go through each. The first, seasonal pop-up cohorts. The second, a little lease, short-term occupancy program. And then third, pre-vitalization events. Okay, so let's start with the pop-up cohorts. I mentioned kind of the explanation of vacancy, right? That you've got a small amount of retail ready spaces. You may have some spaces that are not retail ready, but it wouldn't take a whole lot to get them to that space. You may not have had a willing property owner. And then on the far side of that are buildings, lots that are deteriorating or that really need a lot of work to get them activated. For this pop-up cohort recommendation, we're really talking about retail ready space or those spaces that are close to being retail ready. We're not talking about those that are in massive code violations and whatnot, but those that are pretty close to inviting a tenant. Now, I think everybody knows what pop-ups are. We're an entrepreneur or even a business in another part of town that's maybe interested in testing out the downtown market, pops up their concept in a space for a short period of time. Those are great. We see pop-ups everywhere. Where they are the most impactful, though, is if we can get, this is ambitious, but 6 to 10 willing vendors, that's probably not the right word, but entrepreneurs, startups to commit to popping up during a defined period of time. Because then it's less about just another store, especially one that maybe not really is ready for a full brick and mortar, but instead it's an event, right? It's a village. It's a come see our pop-up vendors. So that's really where the cohort has impact. So what we're recommending is maybe twice a year, a summer cohort and a holiday cohort, so that you can really market and brand around kind of these peak seasons. Going through the arduous process of the inventory and the property intake is going to allow you to know what spaces are either retail ready or are close so that you can kind of pair startups, vendors, entrepreneurs with willing property owners. And there's, mechanics that we think make this work. So first, I mentioned 6 to 10 spaces inside the focus geography so that there is a true impact. Second is kind of an application period where you are inviting folks to participate in this. Giving kind of their description of what their concept is, what they want to do, and a photograph of prior work or product. That's their application. The third part, and I think this is really important, is that this is juried essentially. So what we don't want is junk, right? And like, just hate to be rude, but we don't want vendors, and I've used the word vendors a few times because you may have artisans that are vendors at events that are interested in gallery space, that they're willing to pop up in over a period of time, which would be an amazing addition to downtown. We need to see their product, their inventory to know, okay, is this really a good fit? And is this kind of worthy of this program? So there would be a panel, a selection panel, recommending to have a board member, a merchant, and someone from the arts and culture sector maybe represent. Again, you guys decide what that looks like. Abel, you're gonna be intimately involved with that, but having like an external panel kind of gets that decision off of you so that it's not like, oh, Abel this, Doya this, it's a juried panel. Then a uniformed term across the cohort so that it's, hey, if you're going to participate in this, you've got to be open for these 3 months or these 4 weeks or whatever it is. And that also helps with signage, reporting, and promotion. So you're going to brand this cohort, this village, this experience as something. And so promoting all of those together, they've got to commit to be open certain hours, certain days, and for a specific period of time for this to really work. Then once you make your selections, having kind of a pre-opening orientation, that covers permitting, hours, the event window, kind of signal, and then point of sale and sales tax basics. They'll have to run their own points of sale systems, but essentially, all right, what is going to be required by the city, by Department of Revenue for this to happen? And then you would offer each pop-up entrepreneur a marketing kit that would have, again, a window cling, not the same cling we talked about earlier, but one that signals that this space is participating in this cohort, a sandwich board that with the same brand or the same kind of promotional items that says, hey, I'm open, come in, a printed district map of where these pop-ups are, a hashtag, and a social media post schedule. So this is something that a committee or it'd be great for an action team for them to really handle this. But I think these specifics are what makes this a quality event and gets these entrepreneurs in a good position to test the market successfully, lets the community know about it, and it sets up the property owners for success. They're going to have a committed tenant in there for this short period of time. All right, so that's the first part. The second is, what we're calling, and this is Jeremy's idea, and I love it, a little lease program. This concept really addresses the biggest barrier that property owners have about short-term leases, which is, yeah, sure, I'm interested in having somebody come for a short-term period, but what if I get a legit tenant that comes a month later that wants to rent my space for 5 years? I don't want to miss out on that. So this little lease program is, it's a model where the property owner offers their vacant ground floor space on a short-term agreement, 30 days, 90 days, 6 to 8 months, whatever the tier is. But then there is a clause that essentially a displacement clause that allows the property owner to get out of that short-term lease if they find a full-time tenant. And there has to be some legitimacy there, of course, for this to work, but it protects the property owner, and then Doya would be right there to help replace or find a new space for the displaced tenant, for the short-term lease tenant. This is also a really natural vehicle for deploying district funds proactively rather than reactively. Having a small incentive fund for this, maybe a $500 per month for up to 3 months as a utility subsidy. Because again, we're trying to get these, this is kind of moving beyond the pop-up. So we've got the pop-up, then we've got the, kind of the short-term lease. They've got to be able to grow, out of this. This is a temporary kind of thing with a specific graduation goal. So they need to pay utilities for this time period, have insurance, but these are expensive upfront costs. So really helping them remove the barrier of cost upfront can be really helpful. Having a tenant readiness grant of up to $1,000 per space that would go to the property owner to help with paint, fresh paint, lighting, basic fixtures, and signage. Again, this is for that tier of vacancies that is close to being retail ready, and then offering insurance assistance. Again, the tenant is going to have to cover the insurance, but having Doya as, kind of identifying a willing broker to write this short-term insurance, again, acting as the liaison, really helps from like an economies of scale perspective. If you guys can take the initiative to figure out, all right, who is an insurance broker that will do this, and then, having that information readily available for the short-term tenant really helps. And then again, having a marketing package, really helping them with legitimacy and getting started. These types of things are, gifts to future tenants. However, there's got to be some expectation on the tenant perspective. First, there has to be a vetting process. The prospective tenant has to have a business plan. And you guys know, as well as we do, this will rule out a lot, a lot of folks. And they've got to have a business plan if they're going to be successful, and especially if you are going to help them with cost. So this is a way to really help them kind of get started with that. So they've got to have a business plan. And they've got to have proof of a sales tax permit or a commitment to obtain one, general liability insurance, and completion of a short readiness session with you guys, maybe with information from the city about, okay, this is what it takes to get started. You guys can help align them with existing resources like your Small Business Development Collaborative and others. We're not saying that y'all have to be the ones to provide all of this, but they've got to do some due diligence. And again, the goal is graduation out of a short-term lease into a more permanent one, hopefully in that space, but maybe in another space. Having 1 or 2 graduations per year is a huge success. But this is really a way to have a specific foundation and a program to get this going. Okay. And then the third component of this pop-up and pre-vitalization activation recommendation is the pre-vitalization events. What this is really talking about is those spaces that are not retail ready, and maybe even, city-owned lots. What we're talking about is a one-time, typically, event or activation, tactical urbanism on a site like this to show what the possibilities are. We've seen these time and time again. Milwaukee really got into this, downtown Milwaukee, years ago. 15 years ago, where in their downtown, very dense downtown, they would take a vacant lot or a vacant space and do something cool to attract attention to that lot. And so that people aren't thinking, oh, this is a blighted vacant lot, and we really wish someone would do something about it. but rather, hey, let's do a short-term, funky, quirky activation where maybe there are some string lights put up on poles, like landscape poles, very, very temporary. Some straw bales for seating, a mural that's maybe on wheels of some sort so that you roll it in, food trucks, rented furniture, cornhole. Like you guys will come up with super cool ideas, but it's really the goal is to show what the opportunity is and to get people thinking about these spaces as opportunities and not albatross projects that are never going to happen. So the city-owned, lot is a potential that we're throwing out there. Also, a large footprint meta district building. Maybe you stage that in whatever space is cleaned up and available as a one weekend market, an art gallery, an indoor art gallery market, a maker showcase to test demand for creative use. Again, it's a one day, a one weekend thing, not a huge commitment. But it demonstrates what the space could become. And these are really exciting. They get a lot of press. Generally, you want to be sure that you're photographing it and doing a lot of promotion. And the goal is just to attract interest, investors, developers, and to shift the way we think about these spaces. And we have some other recommendations as well for spaces that would be good to focus on. And then finally, if I can get this to work, we're talking about formalizing the property activation process. The goal here is that you guys have displayed that you know how to do this work well. Joya connected a property owner with an entrepreneur and helped offset early costs, and the result was the Chapter 30 studios. So you guys have done this, you know how to do it. But one person or a group of people know how to do it. Abel, I'm looking at you. So this is really memorializing your expertise in this process so that it can be replicated and that you don't have to be the one to do it over and over again. So what we're recommending here is kind of a 5-phase or 5-stage playbook. This is a document. It's not meant to be a marketing piece. It's meant to be an internal organizational document that really memorializes the activation process, so that it can convert your relationships and your institutional knowledge into a packaged, repeatable process, to hopefully scale this up. So again, it is a document with potentially forms, contacts, timelines, templates needed at each stage. And it's going to be a process to put this together, but one that's worthwhile. So stage 1 that we're going to be memorializing is intake and inventory. And we have already made recommendations for this in focus area 1 and in recommendation 4.1 in this plan, right? That's your inventory, that's your document. We need to know kind of a written record of what each property owner wants, what they're willing to entertain, what their lease terms are, so that you have that readily available. Stage 2 would be prospect identification and vetting. You guys and the Oxnard Downtowners are interfacing with a lot of potential prospects, probably more so than you may even realize through your event planning and promotion, through the farmers market, vendor booths inside the Vogue Theater, and all of this. So really what this is doing is kind of taking all of those contacts that are in your head, that are all in all these different places, and thinking through, okay, who would be kind of a good potential longer term tenant, project, or concept that we can turn into something real. These prospects should be vetted, obviously, on not only their product or concept, but also on financial readiness. It's expensive to open a business, to redevelop a building. We know this. So understanding what their financial readiness is, their operating experience, who's got the ability to take something creative and turn it into a business model, I think is important for that stage. Stage 3 is match and deal structure. So this is where you guys would really be the convener, like I said, the liaison, bring together the property owner and the prospect with a DOYA representative in the room. And your goal is not to act as the broker, but really to be the liaison to help translate between languages. You know, broker language, real estate language can be kind of confusing. This is where you would also bring to the table your suite of resources and incentives that you either have or have been able to implement. Also, this is where you can have those tools like the Little Lease program or the pop-up cohort that you've already identified dates for, maybe your marketing package that we've talked about, and that district data sheet, you know, that we can help you with the data that we have run to really show what the potential is. And what you guys have to offer. Then stage 4 is probably where you bring the highest value, and that's approvals navigation. We talked about putting together that process sheet for those that get your Do Art incentive funding for how to navigate the events process. Then we've talked about doing the fact sheet for the form-based code. This is really something different. This is really helping navigate the process of permitting. It can be confusing, like we said, for outsiders. So just having your knowledge and your expertise navigate these folks through that in kind of a concierge approach is invaluable. And then stage 5 is opening and follow through, you know, the ribbon cutting, the social media announcement, the listing page update. All of these things create future case studies of how this process works. And putting that into kind of documentation really shows your worth and value is something that's really important. I think another reason this kind of ties back to Jeremy mentioning the North Tahoe example, why this strategy matters is because obviously with any district, PBID, special, you know, service district, what have you, you know, it comes up for renewal. And having this memorialized, sets you up for success, but then also this follow through helps you document the work that you've done, because a lot of it you're probably thinking is like you're not, when it's time to talk about, well, why should the PBID be renewed? You may not think, well, I connected these people and that's just no big deal. No, that's a huge deal. The pop-up cohort, the graduation, you know, the Little Lease, saying that you guys were able to facilitate this and have actual doors open, sales tax generated is huge, beyond the visible work like arts, culture, and events that you're already doing. Okay, so we've gone through a lot. I know y'all are probably overwhelmed, so I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy to wrap us up and talk about next steps.
Yeah, thanks for hanging in there. I know it's a lot, but like I said at the beginning, we're talking about bite size. So right now we have an elephant, and we got to eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So as we go through this, and we'll walk you through some of these steps in the process. But we have this document, this plan that has a lot in it, a lot of recommendations, a lot of strategies. We've already have them organized by focus area. We're gonna organize them by year. So what we think you need to work on first, what we think needs to be in that 1 to 3 year, what we think needs to be in that 3 to 5 year time frame. So we're already gonna sort them that way. Then we have your existing committees and partnering organizations, right? So we're gonna sort them that way too. The Oxnard, downtown Oxnarders, what are some things that might be a good role for you? Where are the different committees come in? So we're going to sort them that way. And then, as Jen mentioned in the first recommendation, was our action team process, which is very project based. So we're going to bring together these teams for specific projects. So we're going to really sort all these things into more bite-sized pieces. You all are the core teams. You're getting it all, and you're hearing all of it. But as we go through this, working through implementation, we'll start to sort these things out so that it's a more attainable and approachable list of things, right? Because I know it's a little overwhelming right now, but we're going to whittle this down into what are the bites, what order are we taking the bites, and who's taking each bite, right? Okay. So any questions, feedback, thoughts as we're wrapping up?
You got a way to figure out how we can give Sarah enable another person's stuff?
That would help a lot, wouldn't it? Well, I think getting into telling that story, and a lot of these things are going to build a case for that down the road. We have to do a better job of telling people what the organization does, why it's valuable, and celebrate the wins. And then that helps get more funding and things down the road, I feel like.
How does their office and staff compared to other cities our size?
I mean, it's generally groups like that don't have just massive staff. So it's usually working on a very small staff. Jen may have more feedback because she's done that work before. She's been a Main Street director before. But that's a typical challenge of you have this mountain of work and the workload and expectations with a very limited staff. So you really rely on the board and committees to help carry that load, but they need to be working boards and committees, not just, and we see that all the time for these boards. I'm not saying this is you guys, but this is what we see a lot. For these boards come together once a month or whenever their regular meetings are, they're great at brainstorming ideas and coming up with ideas, but it's ideas for the staff to do. And it's like, that's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be the board actively carrying some of the load for downtown. Jen, I don't know if you have anything to add or not.
No, I think that's right. And I mean, I think very typically we see organizations with small staffs. I mean, we work in other dense urban downtowns. I'm thinking of, Akron, Ohio is one that Jeremy used an example of them in a program that they have. They've gotten really good at, they have, 2 staff members, but they've gotten really good at sharing the financial burden with other community partners. So the city, the Downtown Akron Partnership, the Economic Development Agency work in lockstep and kind of, they don't view it as anything that happens downtown as the Downtown Akron Partnership's job to fund it, So that's what we've seen there. But it's hard to say because it's across the board. But I think what Jeremy said, it really hits the nail on the head. It's all about the staff setting strategy, setting direction, being the face, and aligning partnerships, acquiring funding, but then really utilizing volunteers, boards to be the doers. And that can be hard, but this action team process works. We've seen it. It works so well, even though it seems super simple. It is simple, but it works.
Jeremy, as part of the work product that comes from this, I mean, obviously there was a lot of examples there, but is there any part of this that's connection based for your other clients or people that have had the success to, like, similar to, we reached out, we're talking about the homeless stuff later this month. Because I think that could be really helpful for our group to kind of talk to somebody else that has done this so we can get our heads around it a little bit better and the budgets around it a little bit better. Because the action plan and like that, or the what do you do first is going to be vitally important, because I've only been back on this board for about a year and we want to do everything and we don't do anything. No offense, everybody, but we don't do anything well because we start a lot of things. And we saw that with the vision plan as well, as we got this big document and then we had to go back and actually spend more money getting an implementation plan or an action plan, whatever word you want to use. But I think in terms of getting our group to focus, there is a big budgetary and staffing concern as well, not in terms of our staff can't do it, but in in my opinion, we're not a very big working board. We're a very big idea board. We like things, but there's very few of us, myself included, that actually do the work. So I think having that kind of peer-to-peer talk with another agency or another organization could be helpful to like set expectations with our board as well, and set expectations for us and with Abel and Sarah. So if that's not part of it, that connectivity, I would really like to ask that we can at least have a names of these groups and your connections to them, and we can make our own contact. But I see that being helpful for our group, because we're going to get overwhelmed with budgets and desires. I mean, just not even having that intake. We talked about that at our land use committee last week. Like, we don't have a good pulse on who our businesses are. What do they want to do? I mean, we have Rex on the call that owns a vacant site in town, as part of our group, and just having those conversations and having that intake inventory is going to be a massive undertaking for our staff and our group. And to me, that's like vitally important before we do anything else.
Right, and that does link to some of the future things that we're recommending here. So there are going to be some things you need to do first in a certain order to some of these things. To answer your question, I mean, the plan is full of case studies and examples because I'm the type that if I can see an example or see what you're talking about, I can probably copy it or at least modify it to fit what I'm trying to do. So we try to fill it with a ton of case studies and examples that you can look at and then tweak it for Oxnard, but at least you see how other communities do it. And then, yes, we try to connect you with other former clients or existing clients that have done similar things. We try to include clients as much as we can as case studies. And like the homeless example, for those of you that don't know, we're working with Bloomington, Indiana. It's a college town. They've done a lot to deal with the unhoused population there, but it's a constant growing problem or challenge for them. And I know you all have similar challenges, but I think you're a little bit further in the process than they are. So we saw some value to connecting you two and say, okay, what can you learn from each other? Because we think that peer-to-peer learning is critical. And so we do try to connect the dots as much as we can through that. So it just depends on the project and if we have a good fit to connect you with, but we're more than willing to do that. And we've done that. We had a client in Illinois that's trying to do a little pocket park. So we connected them with that Eagle Alley project that I mentioned as an example, and they talked through it and the things that they learned through that process and things. So we can definitely do that. Any other thoughts, feedback, questions?
I just have a list of projects that we have to work on and priorities, and a lot of what Ashley said it hit the nail right on the head. And then what we're actually already doing and what we have in process, kind of that echoes what you said, and how to obtain those next steps. So like Ashley said, we can actually do the work and not just talk about getting it done.
And that's where that action team process is project based. And we see so much success with that, where instead of we're talking about ideas and brainstorming all the time, we're picking a project and we're focusing on that one project at a time for that committee or that action team. And we're going to work on that project. We're going to break it down into like a 6-month time frame. What can we do over the next 30 days to move this project forward and at least reach some point in 6 months. We may not can finish the whole thing, but can we have a smaller version of it in 6 months? And we try to break this down into little small increments so we can get some traction. And again, it's not rocket science, but it's things that committees always fail to do, of communication, assigning clear tasks, breaking it down into doable steps. Those types of things is what we build into that process. And we try to align a lot of these things to your existing work plan. So like the promotion committee, that's not the right term, but I'm going blank on the exact name of it, but the one that's with social media, they have a goal set for social media followers and things like that. But I don't know if they've gotten to the level of how are we going to get there? And so I think some of the things that we outline for diversifying content and storytelling and things like that, that's the kind of content that's going to get people's attention and help grow that number. So we tried to link the strategies in the plan to your existing work plan as much as possible. So we're not creating new work. We're trying to build off things you're either already doing or wanting to do.
Yeah, so I would agree with you, Jeremy. You guys did a really good job in aligning it with our work plan. So I'm like listening to all of this and receiving it with equal parts of excitement and also anxiety, because it is going to be a challenge in terms of, prioritizing all these projects that I do know the reality of, every project, has these nuances and anything to, and we're especially working in the public space. There's these dependencies. We have some open projects right now that we're still, believe it or not, right, trying to close them out here in the next coming weeks here that we're from ARPA funding. So I do know that even if we're talking about like here's doing this pop-up space activation in a Paseo, even the simplest things can become very, drawn out in time and complicated. But I do appreciate the early stages of building a team around all these and expanding our capacity. I think it's going to be very important if we can get, hands-on assistance from the Tourism Bureau and from our friends over at the West Ventura County Business Alliance and other entities here and volunteers. And so I do appreciate also too all these little the tactics that you've laid out, because these ideas have all been, a lot of these ideas have been just out there orbiting in the atmosphere, and now they're bringing them all together here. And then, how do we do it now? How do we execute it? I love the simplicity of leveraging all those other resources out there by creating these sort of like these how-tos, these incentive programs, the small micro grants and things like that. So yeah, but yeah, now active, just putting that all into a priority list. It's going to be very important here early on, and we would love to hear from others that have been there and done that, so that we can cut our learning curve down. Yeah, and I do act that's really good that we're receiving this report at this particular juncture, because we do have our work plans that we're working on right now to take to city council in another month or so. And then we also, it's not too far off for our renewal too. And this all will go, we'll build a lot of equity with our property owners if we can execute successfully in all this. So yeah, like I said, anxiety, excitement and anxiety here.
He's got to memorialize everything.
Yeah.
That's gonna be the biggest challenge, but I think he's quite capable, especially if he uses his team and asks for help, we can get that done.
And hopefully this will help you give more specific asks, because one thing to just have the broad idea, but as you read through this, I think you're going to see it breaks down into here. In some cases, here's the first thing to do. Here's phase one. It's not just a step-by-step guide by any means, but as you read through each recommendation, it does break it down a little bit further than what we went through today. And that gives you very specific things you can ask people to help with. And it's small, little bite-sized pieces that people can help with as you build toward these full recommendations.
I had another comment. We talked about the branding that do, and we've used that in small places internally here for like our annual reports and things like that. But we also have this other branding process that we're going through actually too with the cultural district. Because the cultural district actually goes beyond the boundaries of the formal PBID. Mm-hmm. The agency that we're working with and my partner with OPAC, we've come to this conclusion that we need to come up with kind of like a complementary brand for the cultural district. So a little bit like, how your thoughts about that, about having another brand. I know this one's still fairly new and we haven't fully exploited the new logo and branding for downtown Oxnard, but also incorporating a secondary brand. Is that?
So with the cultural district, is there a firm that's working to develop that, or is that just something that's been talked about?
It's actively being worked on right now. Okay. There's an agency that's been engaged, and we've had several meetings, and they're focusing actually a little bit even further on the O in Oxnard that can be used in the branding. So,
and maybe that we tweak, depending on what comes out of that we tweak our recommendation. We're just working off what we had access to right now. It's definitely important that those work together and speak with each other. I think that's really important. And it's always tricky in a downtown because you have multiple organizations and entities that are trying to promote themselves while promoting downtown at the same time. We try our best to, we think the priority is promoting downtown Oxnard. How do we put the best vision, or not vision, but perception out there for downtown Oxnard to make it look like an exciting district that people want to come, open a business, shop, dine, visit, all that, while giving credit to the other organizations that are involved in that. But to me, the overarching thing is to promote downtown Oxnard. Now, Doya needs its credit, downtown Oxnard needs its credit, the cultural district needs its credit, but how can the downtown brand drive it? My community is a college town. We have different entities like Main Street, tourism, economic development, all these things, but they've done a good job of, the brand is the community, is Starkville. And so everything, no matter who's doing the event, the brand is Starkville, Mississippi's college town is kind of the brand and the tagline. Now, there may be an event that the Tourism Association's the lead on, or Main Street's doing a project, or all that, but it's happening underneath this umbrella of the community so that the community, we're a small town, it looks really exciting and like a lot of things are going on, when in reality it's all these little small projects happening by different groups, but it's under this umbrella. Does that make sense? So to me, it's most important that downtown Oxnard is promoted with the work of all these different entities and what they're doing. Does that make sense at all? I rambled a little bit, but so I don't know how, I hate for the cultural district just to be its own standalone brand when we're really just trying to promote Oxnard. And this is just a add-on quality of life piece to Oxnard, but the point is we're trying to build up the brand of the community.
So Jeremy, how would that work specifically when PBID law says you're only supposed to promote things within your district? Because we've had inquiries for people out of the district to promote their events, and it's been a very
Challenge.
intense conversation with the board, or especially the marketing committee, of what the brand is when we're beholden to the assessment, people who pay into the district.
And that's something that's a constraint, right? I mean, that's a real constraint that we have to work within. So that's a filter that we're gonna have to run things through. We have this ideal scenario to where we can promote anything that makes downtown look good, but in reality, that's a constraint. We're bound by that boundary. And so that's just a filter that we have to run things through, unfortunately, when it comes to these types of things. So I mean, I think that, and that's, go ahead.
But couldn't we cure that with a different funding source? So if it was funded through a different funded source that's outside of our district, if it's not being pulled from PBID dollars, it's being that particular marketing piece is being funded by the nonprofit arm, wouldn't that cure that problem? Wouldn't that?
I mean, potentially, that's something, I don't know enough about just the inner workings and technicalities of it, but I mean, I think that's what we have to think through is, okay, here are the constraints, here's what we're trying to achieve. How can we make this work? And I think that's an opportunity, or could a different organization fund that particular, like Visit Oxnard or something, could they fund those promotions so it's not tied directly to the TBID or the PBID? Those things to think through on stuff like this. But having the idea of, here's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to promote downtown Oxnard. How can we make that work with these different scenarios?
Jeremy, is it possible to put a dollar value estimated on the marketing, the promotion, the subsidies for insurance, the window treatments, all this stuff that you're proposing we do? I don't know how much discretionary income, not income, but budget we have, but there's a lot that you've thrown out there. It would be really helpful, I think, if you could put a guesstimated dollar value on each thing, so we kind of know the financial part of it.
Yeah, in those matrices, we have just a kind of a symbol that's like we break it down into projects that we think would fall into your existing budget, like things that you wouldn't necessarily, you could probably cover based on things you're already doing. There's one symbol that's things that are probably reasonable within your existing budget, but you might have to plan for it a little bit. And then there's things that probably fall outside your budget right now that you really have to gather resources for somehow. That's to the level that we get with this, because there's so many different variations of it. I mean, if we're talking about like the wayfinding signage, there's one cost if you want to do a Cadillac version directional signage system. There's another cost if you want to do the more short-term version of the sidewalk stickers or things like that. So there's like these good, better, best scenarios for everything, to where, yeah, there's the perfect ideal version of it, but then there's also these incremental versions of it that can start temporary and short term and then evolve over time. So there's so many variables with everything, not to mention different states and different regions have different vendors and things like that. So it's difficult for us to get down to a specific dollar amount. But as we work through this and look at individual projects, we have to work within the constraints, which constraints are staff and just volunteer capacity. Budget is a constraint. All these things. So as you work through a particular project, those are the things we have to talk about, is what is the budget for this and how can we make this work within that budget? And what's the version of it that we can do within that constraint? So that's another reason we take that project-based approach, because then we can narrow it down, okay, here's what we want to do. How can we get there? There's a lot of things we can't do or a lot of reasons we can't do the full version, but what can we do right now given the resources that we have access to? We're big on incremental. So how can we start with what we can do and then evolve and upgrade it over time? Okay. All right, so the next step is we're going to send you this document. Send you this document for your review. We'll give you a few weeks to really digest everything and read through that. We want you to come up with whatever questions, comments, feedback, edits, things like that you have. We'd like for you all to get together. Maybe you read it individually, come up with your own list of questions and feedback. Then you all come together as a team, consolidate those, and Laura and Taylor will send you an example or a kind of a to-do list or a example of how to do this in the PDF. But you'll put all your comments in one PDF document to send back to us. So we're getting one document back with all the comments and notes. We'll read through that, make adjustments. Then we'll have a follow-up call to really finalize the document and finalize all those. And then we'll introduce and explain how that implementation process works. And that's really going to be a revolve around you all picking, okay, what are the starting points? What are the top two or three things that we want to start with? And then we'll give you some feedback on how we can best help and how we can get started. So we'll break that down even further later on. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Well, Laura will be in touch to schedule that follow-up call. We're going to finish up those matrices. We have a couple more tweaks we want to do to those just to clarify things even further. We'll get those extra matrices put in there. We'll send you the document and we'll schedule that follow-up call. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yes. You guys have a great weekend.
Yes.
Okay, well,